but I can't read, I can't write, I can't spell, and most of the time I don't know my left from my right.
Now here's the thing about me that's a secret that most people don't know. I'm borderline retarded, and I can't read. These books that you're recommending, Goethe. I would pick that up and I would be like, 10 minutes later, I'd be like, what's my favorite song? The ABCs?
I think we're kind of getting off topic. Can you name 10 books?
Keep going back to me. Can you?
No, don't change.
No.
10 books.
You're changing the subject, actually.
10 books.
You're changing the subject,
okay,
actually.
3 books.
Okay. Well, the Game of Thrones series,
not a book.
Twilight
I
series.
want the name
It
of
is
the
a book. It is a book.
Dress your age. Carrying a school bag on stage. What are you doing with a school bag on stage? You can't even read.
And we got a lot of heat going into this one. There's a lot of excited people, and I really don't want to let them down, and I just might.
Well, that's why we're here.
I might horse around a little bit during this one and shit my pants and get my clown shoes stuck in a hole.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the only pro-illiteracy podcast on the internet. This is Do You Even Read? I am one of your hosts, the Prudentialist, and I am joined by my ever-so-favorite Canadian on God's green earth, Dimes. How the hell are you?
I'm good now. I'll be better if I just know that you have the talking gun.
I do have the talking gun. I was going to ask you before we went live on the air, can you add that gunshot to the soundboard? That way when I rack around into the chamber at the end of every episode, it implies that it's the last episode.
Oh, I can get a lot of handgun sounds. I can get you guns. I can get you with hormones over top. I got kissy sounds and boing-oings. I got so much going on. I don't have a lot going on in my life.
This is the wife guy talking. So, over the years, we have seen public intellectuals like Dr. Jordan Peterson go on stage and get publicly griped, where they'll ask, "Hey, Dr. Peterson, it's so nice of you to mention the Gulag Archipelago. Have you read that other Solzhenitsyn book?" And then he starts crying and he can't talk about it. So everyone has read Decline of the West, and if you haven't, well, that's okay. Most people haven't either. And maybe you've read Man and Technics. Today we are covering Oswald Spengler's other book that's available in English. We will be reading The Hour of Decision. Well, we won't be reading. We've already read it. But we read, so you don't have to. This was published in 1934. This is 2 years before Spengler had left this mortal coil in 1936. I think it was written in 1933, shortly after the election that took place in Germany at that time. And we have a lot to talk about it. And there was one passage that left me just reeling with depression. So it's a good Spengler text already when I'm black-pilled.
Yeah, just to kick it off, I know Prudentialist had recommended this because he had read it previously. I had read Decline of the West. I didn't read much else from Spengler, and I thought it was important to because I think he's a very important thinker, but it's easy to get anchored to famous thinkers, just single text. Like everyone's read A Revolt Against the Modern World by Evola, but if they read the other things by Evola. So I was excited to read this, and I was surprised at how optimistic it was, because when you hear Oswald Spengler, you think it's all doom and gloom. It's all just narrating an inevitable decay, and there is some of that, no doubt. But he goes to great lengths, especially near the end, of giving a prescription of how to get out of the situation that you're in. And again, this was published in the 1930s, so you have to imagine what was going on at the time. He makes certain predictions that certainly came to pass, some that did not come to pass, or some that were probably worse than he could have ever predicted. But the other thing I was surprised by, and I think this is what anyone's going to know if they pick it up, if they just look at the headings of this book, it's very explicit. It's not a dense historical text. I think, there's really, when I imagine it, there's like 3-4 parts. One of them is the White World Revolution, and another one's called the Colored World Revolution. And this is just me being a fucking big fat dummy, but I'm like, I didn't think they were calling people white in Germany in the 1930s. And I thought it might have been a quirk of the translation in English. And I'm working from a copy, an old scanned copy that's right from the 1930s. There was another copy that I'd found just by accident, just grabbed it, and it was from, AryanRevolution.net. And I said, maybe not that one. But I'm like, oh, maybe, but I'm sure that this is a legitimate copy. It's a faithful translation. And I was just like, oh, they were called. I didn't think they were talking about white people in, turn of the century Germany. But that was just an interesting thing that I noticed that kind of paints the type of thing he's talking about going forward.
Yeah, and again, I'm kind of reminded how a lot of people were writing. This is not me comparing Trump to some other guy, I promise you, because one, that's an insult to both of these gentlemen.
Has someone been watching the Mussolini show?
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting where in the introduction to this, and I have the Charles Francis Atkinson translation. I have a physical copy in front of me. I bought it off of George Bagby at a conference one time. He always has a lovely volume of his library that he likes to sell for extra cash. And he had said the national revolution of 1933 was a mighty phenomenon that will remain such in the eyes of the future by reason of its elemental super-personal force with which came the spiritual discipline that which it was carried through. And of course, you know what that's referencing. But it's very interesting to see how we always compare the optimism of such moments right after elections when, quote unquote, our guys win. In this case, the changing out of Weimar to what would later become the Reich, I'd imagine would make Spengler a very happy man in the midst of the interwar years and his lamentation of what the First World War had done to Europe.
Yeah, and I guess we could jump right into it. If anyone's got any other hot and wet Spengler facts, share them in the chat right now. But I've got a whole selection of excerpts we're going to get into and discuss. There was this one line from early on in the book that just have this highlighted at the top of my notes. I think this sets the stage for everything. He just says, human history is war history.
I have that one bookmarked too. There are a lot of bangers in here, and I don't mean to just reduce Spengler down to a series of great based quotes. I will be reading most, if not all of them, but yeah, I liked that one. I had that one saved. There's an early one too where he's talking about World War I that I find really interesting, where he talks about the changing of warfare, about how warfare had changed. We had became all about mobility, and then what had changed was the principle of national universal conscription. Like, he does a long time breaking in when he's talking about like the world wars and world powers about what has changed so much. And
yeah, it gets to that.
Really good.
Yeah, and that's important too, because he's talking about. We'll get to this in the notes, but just teed up early on where he says there's a great era of peace in the West, in the white world. And he said one of the contributing factors was just the sheer scale of war. It was the size of the conscription. It was that you had a standing army, and then you would have a standing army of such scale that it made people more cautious of engaging in open conflict. And then, of course, this would have led to World War I. He describes World War I. Not in some detail. He spends more time, I think, on the French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution, I'd say. But, he pinpoints an issue of what has caused basically the white world to become so passive and inert. He doesn't use the word feminized, but that's basically what he means. And again, I'm getting to this early, but let me ask you this. Okay, so let me just say what I'm going to say first, and then I'll ask you the question. What he says is what you need is a race of the strength of will to see this to the other side. Would you say this book takes a Nietzschean approach? And I know that's, there's other ways to describe it, but I think when I say Nietzschean, people will understand what I mean by that.
I would say so.
Yeah, that's what I noticed too. It's a lot of strength of will. It's a lot of speaking about race, but not in sort of the scientific racialism that a lot of us would discuss race. You had made a good point earlier, and maybe you can expand on that now, where he said his notion of race is much more ancient than what we would see as more just qualitative physical attributes, biological attributes, maybe eugenic attributes. But when he says race, it's something, because when he speaks of civilization, Spengler is known for this. When he speaks of civilizations, almost these great organisms that they live and they die almost inevitably, and they, reach, especially empires, they reach a size and they begin to collapse inward, and there's not much you can do about it. Similarly, when he talks about race, it's a much deeper but a much bigger idea, more than just sort of the ethno-nationalism that a lot of people might be familiar with. So, yeah, do you wanted to speak on that?
Yeah. So there's Spengler delineates very clearly that as democracy and liberalism take greater hold in the West, the notion of the state, a culture, and its people, and by extension race, becomes reduced into these material conditions. And it's the we gotta get the Canadian perspective in there. So yeah, absolutely lightning thunder. But so for instance, he writes, and so European states got out of form in proportion as they were more progressively governed. This was the chaos which moved Metternich to oppose democracy, irrespective of its tendency and the romantic type of the wars of liberation, as well as the rationalistic types of the Bastille stormers, both of which were combined in 1848. But later on, he talks about the formation of political parties of all types. We've reduced things now from an organ, that the nation or a people or a race is an organism, but instead now is being reduced to these materialistic, rationalist understandings of things, or better yet, are compounded by a moral, theocratic understanding of peoples. For Spengler, he takes a very similar position, not so much in the sense that, like, I'm a big man of heroes, although Spengler certainly is. He is pointing out that a nation and a race, it comprises of a natural progressing order of mixture. Not in the sense that we're all supposed to be ethnically ambiguous chuds or anything like that you might see on Twitter talking about statues, but more so along the lines of that this is a force of nature that has always allowed the strong ones to survive over the rest. And these great periods of peace and this rationalism of humanistic rationalism, of Kantianism, of Rousseau and others, has fundamentally allowed the system of nature to be disrupted. And in turn, because we're now looking at everything metrically, not the metric system, but just by bean counting and an Excel spreadsheet of people and ideas, we fundamentally have reduced the nation, and by extension race, to a very abstract system or notion that allows for romantic nostalgia to take place, whether it's him criticizing the communists and their romantic nostalgia of times prior to the Industrial Revolution, or the liberal romanticism of the nation and the people who would be proposing the 1789 understanding of the nation contra Ernest Renan.
That's a great summary, and I just wanted to address one thing here. The wall gone. It said optimism is cowardice, and some people might be misinterpreting what I meant by optimism. I didn't, not optimism in the sense of it has a happy ending, and says that really. Can you imagine Spengler ending this with God wins in the end? Guess
hard to imagine.
Guys, don't worry, evil does not triumph. No, but he more so than saying that everything's just doomed and our destiny is nothing but decay. He was basically, in so many words, saying that the way out of this are those who are rising to the occasion of being capable of great and terrible things. Which is saying and that ties right into how we started this by saying human history is a history of war. He's basically saying, and I think he identifies the Prussians, and but the vitality of the capacity of the strength of will. That's what he's talking about. So it's not so much that we're all doomed or the West is doomed. It's like, no, you can claw and gnarl and fight and just go fucking insane and get out of this thing. But that's what it's going to take. And again, this is published in the 1930s. So I think the same rule would apply, because strength of will does not believe in courts. It doesn't even believe in the forces of nature. It does not see itself as above that. It just doesn't pay any mind to it. It is pure ambition and the quest for survival. And that's what it is. It's singularly focused. It doesn't pay any heed to anything else. And so, it doesn't wonder what the international community would think of anything. And that's, again, an ancient way of viewing the world that most people could not even understand these days. So I'm just going to start reading some parts here, if that is okay.
Yeah, go for it.
It's not the longest book in the world either.
You can comfortably finish this in about 2 hours.
Drew's like this fucking speedrunner. Like I was going to say, a couple days, 2 hours.
I got off work and I reread this when in between now and the show.
Man alive. He starts off here saying, little as one knows of events in the future, for all that can be got from a comparison with other civilizations, is the general form of future facts. So much is certain. The forces which will sway the future are no other than those of the past. Those forces are the strength, the will of the strong, healthy instincts, race, the will to possession and power, while justice, happiness, and peace, those dreams, which will always remain dreams, hover ineffectively over them. We are still in the age of rationalism, which began in the 18th century and is now rapidly nearing its close. We all are its creatures, whether we know it or not. That's a familiar idea if anyone's familiar with the traditionalists or the perennialists. In English offices and clubs, it used to be called common sense. In French salons, esprit. In German philosopher studies, pure reason. The shallow optimism of the cultural Philistine is ceasing to fear the elemental historical facts and beginning to despise them. And if I can just carry that sentiment through to the next part here, he continues on, as regards the international situation of the moment, we are all in danger of misreading it. After the American Civil War, the Franco-German War, and the Victorian Age, existence and progress among the white races ran so incredibly calm, secure, peaceful, and carefree that one may search in vain through the centuries for anything analogous. We do not realize what led up to this, in the long run, impossible situation. There was the fact that standing and expanding armies rendered a war so incalculable that no statesman any longer dared to make one. The fact that technical economic development was in a feverish condition, which was bound to come to a speedy end because of its dependence on rapidly vanishing conditions. And finally, the resultant fact that the grave, unsolvable problems of the time were being pushed more and more into the future. That's interesting. The peace period from 1870 to 1914 and the memory of it rendered all white men self-satisfied, covetous, void of understanding, and incapable of bearing misfortune. The coward security of 1900 is at its end. Life in danger, the real life of history, comes once more into his own. Now, with that in mind, that really just gathers together everything we were just saying. And as we said, Spengler passed away shortly, like around this time, I think just before it. This is part one. There was never a part two, as far as I know. So I wonder if our historical situation has changed since where he was standing. Do we have any recollection of an era of peace, or has it been so many generations of where we're standing in North America of seemingly constant war, not only constant war, but ugly war, constant paranoia. I from where I'm standing right now, it feels like millennials and younger, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they have no dreams of peace. They have no belief that the land of milk and honey can ever be achieved. Like, people are very, very cynical, and people are very, I don't know, this might sound like a reach, but almost psychologically primed for an unthinkable war. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you think the Western man, the white world, is still so passive as what he was describing back then?
There is certainly this is the thing, for the three conflicts that he mentions all take place on the soil of the respective races that he mentions. So the last European conflict that we have, of course, is the Second World War, where the continent writ large is ravaged. There's not anything in the sense that compares to Franco-German, the American Civil War, or anything like that. So, I mean, generations have experienced peace, and even for America, while there is a very distinct warlike people, it is a unique, almost basically ethnic class of Scotch Irish people who will put, the psalms on their weapons or on their patches to simply say, blessed is the Lord who has prepared my hands for battle and trained my fingers in war. But like that, it's not like standing armies where we have today, where it's like everyone goes in for benefits. And then when people think about getting deployed, you get people like Tim Waltz who chicken shit and pussyfoot out to avoid deployment. So I mean, in a lot of ways, I think we still have experienced a great deal of peace outside of small numbers of people who have killed. And so I think that we are in a place of peace because as he writes later on, this is before World War II, mind you. Spengler basically writes Bolshevism has won, and Bolshevism came from within. The call is coming from inside the house. And so I would say, at least in regard to this, like we're people that dream of war and we think about violence because we know how bad things are. But so many of us are fundamentally unequipped and inexperienced with what that kind of violence would look like.
Yeah, it makes, because I think with World War I or World War II, you had, I mean, there was a genocide in the past, of course. I think there was something approaching total war. If you were in Ireland during the Viking invasions, I'm sure it felt like total war because no one was spared, especially. But even in the more ancient war, you had your martial class, you had your warrior class. You didn't have this widespread recruitment, and so there might have been more conflict, but it was more acute. And the nature of conflict and fighting was different. Whereas with World War I, you just had, toxic gases dumped in trenches. You had unthinkable armaments being deployed. And this is even before the nuclear bomb. But so it almost seems that the war we have now is more akin to the more ancient war. It's the people are distant from it. And the only time it would come to your door was when there was an invading army. So I think, to your point, there might be, is anyone, even though we're exposed to war constantly, is anyone in America, if we're being honest, really worried about boots on the ground invasion, except from what you're experiencing at the southern border? Like, I don't think that's something we've really had to be concerned about like a siege.
Well, it's not something that we conceptualize because it's something that's been so mimetically inoculated against the population. Like Spengler writes on very clearly, like the colored world revolution, i.e. Bolshevism, Russia is no longer a white country because the Tsarist regime that had instituted European reforms for like the last 300 years had been taken away by like the Mongolian hordes of race resentism and Bolshevism. And that is now spreading. And it doesn't have to, he basically says, listen, Marxism will be the cover in which former colonial territories in the non-white Western European world will be rallying against to destroy Western nations.
Geo has joined the chat.
I'm sure he has. And to which, like, this is the same sort of stuff Lothrop Stoddard is writing about 10 years prior in the 1920s. And so, that kind of conversation is not one that you can have in polite political realms these days. The Overton window hasn't gotten that far to the right yet. Although I think it's getting there at a pretty breakneck pace. I think it's kind of impressive to see where we are from just 10 years ago. But Spengler just makes it flat out clear that, like, because of liberalism, because of humanism, and because of the disgusting, Christian break-off sect like the Ebionites, in this instance, socialism and Bolshevism, a lot of Western powers are not going to be able to rise to the occasion and force this revolution to go down with force. And he makes the claim, and of course this is 1934, he makes the claim that the German state is the only one that can still do it. And his understanding of history is quite unique. For instance, at the beginning, he sort of points out that the United States, because of how vast it is, we have very little concern of what happens outside of our borders. A guy in the Midwest, which he always says Middle Western, which I think is really nice and kind of an archaic way to talk about the Midwest.
Yeah.
He had says, like, does the Midwestern man really think about what's going on outside of the world, outside of maybe what's happening in San Francisco or New York? Does he? It's the same thing with like the Englishman. Does he really care about what's happening outside of perhaps London? Same with France. And he kind of just points out, he's just like, they're so clobbered in their own financial system. And also, guys, those who like to talk about the petrodollar or dollar imperialism, Spengler's calling them the USA out about this almost 100 years ago. I'm like, hey, I've seen this argument before from people like William Appleman Williams, but it was kind of wild to see dollar imperialism come out of Spengler's mouth about America.
It's so funny how the conversation hasn't changed at all in 100
Isn't
years.
it so depressing that the conversation hasn't changed in 100 years?
Just reading this book the whole time, you're like, oh. We have bringing Spengler back to the future and just showing him that nothing's changed. We just have more viruses now. We have the only thing we're good at is coming up with more weapons. It's like, oh, if Spengler's at least we have sex robots. I'm like, man, you don't want to open that Pandora's box. That's the thing. Like, we're talking about sex robots, like that's splitting the atom. We don't want to unleash that sort of fetish nonsense on the world.
I'm reminded of Fisto from Fallout New Vegas. He's like, finally, I've been waiting to get my hands on that. Not that I'm one of those freaks, but for my clients.
You really know our audience, bringing out some Fallout stuff here.
I got it, man. I got it.
So just to the point we were making just about Germany, there's a section here, page 26 in my edition. I think
it's the same one I have.
I like to focus as much as I can on his historical examples, but he says,
I have this one. Go on.
Under the Directorate, it looked as if the country, resigned and sick of ideals as it was, would have welcomed any form of government that would guarantee outward and inward peace. But then came Napoleon, an Italian who had chosen Paris as the base of his schemes for power, and created in his armies the type of last Frenchman to uphold France as a great power for fully a century, a brave, elegant, bragging, rough, fond of killing, plundering, destroying, all for its own sake without any object, with the result that none of these victories brought France the smallest permanent advantage, in spite of the incredible bloodshed. Only her fame increased, not even her honor. At bottom, it was a Jacobin ideal, which, in contrast to the Girondist ideal of the small businessman and the Philistine, had behind it never the majority, but always the power. The polite forms of the ancien regime in politics were ousted by others definitely plebeian. When, in spite of this, a war broke out between individual powers, the neutrals armed at once in order to maintain the balance at the conclusion of peace, even though minor shiftings of frontiers had taken place. One new formation only resulted. Germany, the personal creation of Bismarck, became a great power, and, what is more important, it lay in the center of the existing system. In this simple fact lies the germ of a tragedy which nothing could be done to prevent. Europe's state system as a unity was at an end, and the World War, postponed in 1878, threatened to break out on account of the same problems on the same spot. And in 1912, it happened. So that's a bit of a historical background for how geopolitically the role of Germany. And would it be fair to say that he focuses on Germany pretty heavily in this book, Germany being I'd say like the main region that could, redeem the white world.
Yeah, that's the central thrust of his thesis, is that, listen, he lays out the wars that had taken on, especially the War of 1914, and from there he just points out that while the world, the nation, or the white Western world, functionally has focused too much on the economy and the materialism therein, and has not looked at culture or history or the things that we would consider to be an organic form of cultural development. Whereas because Germany as a unified state is so young because of Bismarck and the German unification, it is a power that has the capability to perhaps step up to the occasion, because per his own thesis of cycles of history, Germany has functionally only just begun.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was just muted there for a second. I wanted to, and if you want to jump into any of your notes, let me know, because I have a few.
So one thing that's sort of important is that while I think most people kind of have a pretty rough understanding of where Bolshevism and Marxism and the revolutions of 1848 and such come from, I want to just read this, and this is on page 97, so we can have it on screen for our lovely audience here. They probably this was a pretty hefty pill to swallow. I literally had just felt absolutely depressed. It's right there on screen. The picture of the streets of Moscow shows the goal, but let no one suppose that it is a spirit from Moscow that is conquered here. Bolshevism's home is Western Europe, and has been ever since the English materialist worldview, which dominated the circles where Voltaire and Rousseau moved as docile pupils, found effective expression in Jacobinism on the continent. The democracy of the 19th century already amounted to Bolshevism. It lacked only the courage to its logical conclusions. It is only a step from the Bastille and the equality-demanding guillotine to the ideals and street fighting of 1848, the year of the Communist Manifesto, and only a second step from there to the fall of Western Tsarism. Bolshevism does not menace us. It governs us. Its idea of equality is to equate the people and the mob. Its liberty consists in breaking loose from the culture and its society. That is the call coming from inside the house. And that everyone, I know there's a popular sort of Twitter meme, or even like the Twitter user Kovefeanon tells you like the communists won World War II. Spengler says no, like we're governed by them now, by the notions of liberal democracy and materialistic humanism. Because once we've divorced ourselves from the nature of an organism as culture, where culture constantly develops, it grows, it progresses, it shows the best strengths and tantamounts of its people. When we stop focusing on that, and by extension, we no longer allow a culture or a nation or a race or a people to sift through its own ends, either through conflict or through development or through a caller to a higher order, whether that be Christianity or whether that be non-Christian religions, or even just a basic theological concept that there is something greater than yourself. And we now allow these things to become optional ways to participate in society. He even comments this about the Americans, like even the Puritanism of the Anglo-Saxon founders has functionally become a secondary facet of church-going or identity. And now there are other things in which we ritualize, which are based around the economy. And because we've become so economically focused, we've allowed the worst and the weakest aspects of our society to dominate, which is that materialist lens. And so how else does Bolshevism grab hold than focusing on that and that alone, taking advantage of what used to be the Christian understanding of martyrdom or seeking the kingdom of God, and now turning it on for worldly power and putting the least among us in a position where they should not be ruling. Like go look at the death masks of Robespierre and others. These were not pretty people. They were uggos, and their body was as ugly as their mind and soul. And this is the kind of thing that Spengler spends a great deal of time on, talking about what this sort of Bolshevism looks like. And it doesn't just look like the streets of Moscow. It looks like everything that the West has birthed since 1789 onward.
Ugly and dead and infamous. Wow, is literally me. No, this is good that you put this right here. I was going to get to this a bit later, but I think I got some notes here that show that he basically traces communism back to Christianity.
He makes that just as clear as well in Decline of the West, that Christianity is the godfather of Bolshevism.
Because a lot of people, especially in the conservative sphere, will speak of communism, and they probably should say Marxism, but they say communism anyway, as if it's just some mind virus that arrived from space one day. And anyone with even a cursory understanding of history or any sort of coherent philosophical framework, I think will identify that's just an extreme within the liberal framework. So I think he is correct in what he's saying. Now, I think he's I wouldn't call him a traditionalist either, but because I don't think he's even saying we can unwork or work our way back. He's taking more of the Nietzschean approach that you just need to power through all that. But a lot of people will fail to see, like, he's basically describing communism as hyper materialism, and materialism emerging from sort of the Anglo framework, the globally dominant Anglo framework. And then he goes back even further and says, the idea of even utopianism. I might disagree. This is where I might disagree with some stuff. And we'll get to the more claims against Christianity later. Not because I think he's spiritually wrong, but I think he might be historically wrong, or his idea of Christianity might be pretty reductive. But I do see where he's getting that. And I think that's the right timeline to keep in mind. Whereas, like, everything was normal, and then fascism showed up one day, and communism showed up one day because some people are crazy and stupid. That's how you see people talk about this, and they don't see how it relates conceptually to everything else. So, I mean, he spends quite a bit of time on Bolshevism. He opens up by talking mainly about liberalism, then moves over to Bolshevism. Maybe we can even move to Bolshevism now.
I think that it's important before we maybe jump to Bolshevism is going to be the amount of time that Spengler spends talking about just the economization of the world, especially in the West.
Absolutely. Did you have something on that? Because I have a few things I could even talk about there.
Yeah, let me go get to the one page I had in mind, and then from there we can go about there.
I'll just drop this in here. Page 58 is what I'm looking at. Make sure.
Mine starts on 55, but yeah, you go ahead.
I had a part here. It says, nations of a new order are about to arise, which are not as those of today. Summations of individuals of equal rank and of like speech, nor as those of yesterday, when, as in the Renaissance, one recognized with an assurance that rested on the style, the soul of it, a painting, a battle, a face, an idea, a form of moral outlook, and of an opinion as Italian, although there was yet no Italian state in existence. The Faustian nations of the end of the 20th century will be elective affinities of men with a common feeling about life, with the same imperatives of a strong will, and naturally with the same language, but without their knowledge of that language constituting either a hallmark or limitation. They will be men of race, not in the sense of today's belief in race, but in my sense of it as a matter of strong instincts, among them that superior eye for the things of reality that the cosmopolitans and authors of today can no longer distinguish from the flash of mere intelligence. In short, men who feel themselves born and called to be masters. The idea of the Faustian civilization grew up here at its roots, and here it will win the final victory in its history or swiftly perish. Now that sounds like what he would say to end the book. He just says that at page 58. So he spends the rest of the time building on that point. But right from the get-go, he's, again, I use the word optimistic incorrectly, but he is saying that, okay, the only way through there's a way through this. There's a way out of the liberal mindset, and but it can't be described even with liberal tools or liberal mechanisms. That's what's so interesting about it. And what I found was, the great irony of Nietzsche, who I think is one of the great philosophers, is the people that he would be writing for almost don't need to read it, because the types of men he's describing would not look to intellectuals to inspire them. Their ambition is something almost extraterrestrial. They're driven by something else, like what drove Napoleon. It wasn't that he was inspired by all these authors. Not really. There was something, even de Maistre talks about this. He talks about the concept of sovereignty as not as an individual or a rank, but a space that you occupy, a space that demands to be occupied within any sort of advanced civilization. And those who are drawn to it know they are drawn to it, but they don't really need coaching to get there. They don't need a philosopher to inform them that type of man exists. It's sort of like, it's like elite theory destined for plebeians. That's the grand irony of it. So like the people who take Nietzsche very, very seriously, seem to be destined to never be the Overman. But anyway, so what he's describing is these types of people, and maybe that's not you or me or anyone, that's okay, but they exist, and they probably don't need to be told that they're those people. Anyway, you can continue now. You got another part here at page 55, was it?
Yeah, just he brings sort of the conclusion of looking at World War One as a combination of materialistic and plebeian forces, and he sort of laments the process of economic warfare. And I mean, he talks about this with the United States later on when he talks about like all the little democracies or republics we set up with like dollar imperialism. Or here he talks about the Opium Wars and what we would call economic warfare. And so he talks about later on, going on to page 56. He says, and again, this is a very Germanic understanding between Germany and England. So you're not really getting the most pro-Anglo-Saxon take here. But he says, above all, in England, by the middle of the 19th century had become a nation of shopkeepers, an enemy power was not to be overthrown by military, but ruined by economic rivalry, and at the same time retained as a purchaser of English goods. That had been the intention of free trade liberal imperialism since Robert Peel. Napoleon conceived of a continental blockade as a purely military measure because he had no other available against England. On the continent, he created only new dynasties, whereas Pitt founded trading and plantation colonies in distant lands. The War of 1914, however, was fought by England, not on France's behalf nor on Belgium's, but for the sake of the weekend, to dispose of Germany, if possible for good, as an economic rival. In 1916, there set in, side by side, the military war, a systematic economic war, to be carried out on when the other came inevitably to an end, and from then onward, the war aims were oriented more and more in that direction. The Treaty of Versailles was not created to intend to create a state of peace, but to organize the relation of forces in such a way that this aim could be at any time secured by fresh demands and measures. So we now see the transfiguration of warfare, at least in English eyes, in the midst of free trade and the corn laws that would be born out of, as a method of control, and not through martial spirit and so on. And this is where you would see the like Adorno or Horkheimer criticisms of this era of German conservative thought, wherein even when talking about decline, there is the same petty romanticism that they criticize in the Bolsheviks or the liberal nationalist. And to some extent, I can see that, because on one hand, I'm looking at it realistically. Like a lot of like the big debate that we have right now is like AI, and like, is there a bubble? Is there not? What can this be used for? And I mean, like, the internet found its purposes. I think kind of it grew organically, despite it being like a defense technology. I don't think we've yet fully realized what AI is going to be used for. I think we have an idea so far, but I don't think we haven't seen its full potential be unleashed. And so when I look at like economic warfare or the bomb or sanctions or tariffs, as Trump's now trying to reinvent the 19th century, I'm looking at this, and from what Spengler is reading or writing for in front of me here, is that there is this romantic kind of understanding of warfare, a different kind, one that we would see in the perennialists like Evola's Metaphysics of War, and written by great playwrights like Wagner and Goethe. But like, I think that at least maybe it's just my English brain, or my Anglo brain is telling me, well, yeah, I'm going to use every tool at my disposal to crush my enemy, because that's just what you do, like realistically speaking.
Yeah, but it's total war. And I think that's, we sort of use the word romantic vision of war. I think another romantic vision of war is war that is bounded, and war where there are rules. And the rules only seem to exist insofar as there is a larger conglomerate of nations that will enforce those rules. But absent that, if you are being invaded, we talked about, I said this at a speech recently at an event, where if you can imagine unconstrained civil war, you look towards the Middle East and they're sending children out in bomb vests, and you recoil in horror at what they're doing. I'm like, I could see people getting to that here. I don't think it would take them that long. If you're convinced that you're being invaded by a true existential threat that will completely decimate your land, there's a lot of things that you'll do. I bet you can get a lot of formerly reasonable people to that point. You're going to have women with carrying razors in their vaginas. You're going to see all kinds of wild prison shit. just out in the world. You know what I mean? So like that's the warfare, like an ugly sort of warfare that we try and keep in mind, but also we're trying to, like, it takes a lot to get what Spengler terms the white world to that point. And I've encountered quite a few people in our spaces saying that, you know, white people, the West, Europeans are cowardly because look at what they were doing in Nepal. I believe it was Nepal not long ago. They were breaking into the mansions of former prime ministers and beating the shit out of them, torturing their parliament because they took Facebook away for a week. And we say, think of what we could do if we can marshal our forces like that. And I said, yeah, but those are brown people. It takes a lot to get white people to collectivize. And maybe that's a feature, not a bug, because what's the difference between a revolution and a chimp out? I don't think it's as common for white people to chimp out over just, you know, you saw a sloppy TikTok and now half your city's on fire. You know what I mean? So it takes a lot to focus us to get to that level. And I don't necessarily think that's weakness. I think what you're seeing is what I just described, which is, and I think I'm describing a lot of people where they will talk like they're compelled to war. They yearn for open conflict. However, they're not fucking retards. They understand what that means. They're not ignorant to what the war will result in, the consequences of this. And they're trying to hold these two realities in their head at the same time. And what many on our side will say was just do away with your concerns of conflict. Just run towards it. And I'm like, no, that's what makes us special. You know what I mean? That's what you're forecasting 20 years in the future. No one's doing that in Bangladesh. No one's doing that in fucking Afghanistan. They're not. And maybe that's good for them, but I don't necessarily think that's good for us. Anyway, I don't think...
Well, I remember, like, Tucker Carlson, this was a couple of years back, or maybe when he had first got it started solo before some of the kookiness, where he had had a tweet where or I think maybe a text message had leaked where he had said, this is not how white people fight, when he's talking about, like, some of the, lack of better, like, just chimp outs or the American scholar jogger violence that we kind of see on our news feeds all the time. And he's talking about, like, this is not how white people fight. And like a lot of people got upset by that, but it was like, no, it's a fundamentally true observation. And even also like the Nepalese thing that took place last month, the military basically kind of like shut most of that shit down pretty quickly. And now they're kind of trying to get everything in order and together. Like only 72 people, I think, is the official death toll of what had taken place there. And even then, the interim government's offering payouts for those affected, property or personal or otherwise. And it's not, I don't know how much of that'll be a permanent, long-standing thing, because you can have a pretty nasty riot and kill some people, but if it doesn't institute lasting change, then what are you going to do? It's sort of perhaps maybe a better example to look at is for effective, getting people out or actual authority or violence would be perhaps the Kazakhstan and what used to be like a Soviet colonial project, literally by immigrating like ethnic Russians into theirs now, where it's majority Kazakh after a pretty nasty revolution protest and riot 40 years ago in the late 80s, kind of comes to show how things change. But I mean, in these comparisons here, I mean, Spengler really does kind of highlight some of the major differences that have emerged here, and even Spengler makes it very kind of clear that he doesn't know if the incoming administration of the Reich has any idea how existential or how deep the rot is. Because like even a lot of MAGA people are like, Trump has no idea how bad it is or how primed his political opponents are, not just in the civil service, but also like radical left-wing terrorism. Because the response from this administration has effectively told left-wingers, from Jimmy Kimmel to the Antifa tranny people on Discord, that you can kill Charlie Kirk and lie about it and get away with it with no questions asked. And then the best you'll do is maybe get like 2 weeks off the air, if less than that, right? And your furry trans boyfriend can escape the clutches of the FBI. And so in this regard, yeah, like I don't think we've gotten to a point where we're going to organize and do some of the insane shit that maybe U.S. troops saw in Vietnam with kids. But maybe we'll get there. I don't know. But at the same time, like Spengler's talking about the same shit you and I have been observing, only just about 100 years earlier, and things have progressively gotten worse.
Yeah, things have progressed. The capacity for mass movements, I think, has drastically changed. It might not even be viable anymore. We speak of like mass movements as like a 20th century phenomenon with mass media that allowed that. I know Martin Gurry, who wrote Revolt of the Public, former CIA guy, but he talks about how the mass movement's effectively over. It's very fragmented. It's a matrix of smaller publics, and a public is just a group of affiliation. It's almost impossible to get a large number of people coordinated in that way. I think the only way you could do it might be racially, and we saw that Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter was a fucking mess. Black Lives Matter wasn't anything other than black people like burning shit and stealing shit. If you looked at the heights of that organization, it was a scam from top to bottom. Like, it wasn't serious.
Yeah, but what did work out of that ended up becoming the effective revolution wasn't so much BLM. It was really the changes from the judiciary, everything that came in that regard with Soros and the rest. Because now, every time there's a chimp out, effectively speaking, you can more or less get away with it.
Yeah, and the whole point of this was to say, like, to show Spengler or show an early 20th century revolutionary how show Lenin what has become of the communist revolution, how disjointed and how prone to infighting it is just due to the nature of the technological revolution. We have unimaginable reach for information and messages, and therein lies the problem. The signal to noise ratio has been completely flipped, and now no one knows anything, no one can pay attention to anything, no one can really coordinate much of anything, to the point where if something does get coordinated, we assume it's an op, we assume it's fake or astroturfed. So convinced we are that something like that isn't even that possible because people are so fucked up. And you know what? Most of the time they're right too.
Well, someone had asked me at a conference I spoke at. My speech is available. Y'all can see it on the Old Glory Club's channel. It's called No Man Knoweth the Hour. And I talk a little bit about collapse and forces behind social revolutions and the things that this administration, and by extension, just like Americans in general, are going to have to deal with in the coming decades. And someone had asked me, he's like, well, do you see like right-wing revolutionaries forming? And I said, look, man, like I'm like the kid on the tricycle from The Incredibles, where it's like, what are you waiting for? It's like something exciting to happen, I guess. Like, I don't think you're going to see the right-wing sort of paramilitarism of the 1920s and 30s Weimar. Like, I don't see it happening. Well, could I be wrong? Potentially. But what I'm saying is that the ability to organize is so effectively fractured because, one, you and I can be on like 5 different platforms that mean nothing. And then we like to stay in our cozy little ghettos where we encourage people not to do anything. And then, like you said, when people do something, even if it's as silly as the Proud Boys or the Patriot Front guys, like, I have nothing bad to say against either group. But my point is like, people will look at you and think that you're full of feds, and then they don't want to do anything. So it's like, it's going to be hard for any of that kind of thing to emerge in this current state. Whereas for Spengler, he sees this as an organic aspect of the old way, of an older form of the ancien regime, trying to lash out against this purely materialistic proletarian understanding of how culture and people work.
Yeah, just to your previous point about the difficulty in organizing, because that is a good speech. Everyone should go read the transcript of that. I believe that speech there's also a video of it. I remember.
Yeah, you can see me in a beige suit talking to you how bad things are.
No, he's got a good stage presence, man. Like, he's pacing the stage in a way that a lot of people don't know how to do. This is not a nervous man, which is a mark against his character. Only psychos can know how to speak.
Well,
so
I've been
effectively
doing.
like that.
I've done public speaking and speech and debate stuff for like over 10 years,
Yes.
from high school, college, and what I do for a living IRL. So it was.
See what I'm saying? Sick. It's a sickness.
I am a psychopath in the sense that I didn't write any notes down. The only time I look at my notes is to read a quote from Theodore Judson, because I have pretty pewter metal plates from my university days. Say I'm really good at talking out of my ass.
But just to the point of how difficult it is to organize anything on the right wing, the only type of organization I could ever imagine would be white nationalist organization, because I actually don't know what it looks like to have like a Christian nationalist mass revolt like that. But we've seen what it can do along racial lines. Because if you think back, we did this on Blood Satellite, where we did a whole arc discussing the pillars of white nationalist thought. We talked about Rockwell, William Luther Pierce, all kinds of thinkers, writers, and whatnot. And if you read the history of it, I mean, at its peak, the KKK had over 1 million members. That was a mass organization. At its peak, the National Alliance, run by William Luther Pierce, had, I think, north of 200,000 dues-paying members. These were large, well-funded organizations that could throw their weight around politically. So just consider those numbers and what we've got right now. And it's not to disparage any group, because there's very dedicated people across the political spectrum working on projects, but can you get 1 million dues-paying fucking members to this? No. Forget about it. The National Alliance, even with all the cosmotheism, hocus pocus shit, like 200,000 dues-paying members, funding a compound, funding actual candidates and shit, like it's a knife fight in the trenches over scraps at this moment. And that's across the board. The communists are dealing with this too. Any radical, identitarian, or any public organization that we were talking about before, it's the same shit. Like every single one of them still has the dream of the mass revolt that I just don't think is in the cards for any of them. And what do we do with that information?
Well, it also speaks right to the fracturing of our identity, because Americans, and to a large extent also some Canadians, are so thoroughly atomized that even asking the question, what is an American or what is a Canadian, is a fundamentally existential one, because it fills you with dread, because you don't know how to answer that. Like, do I fit in that category? What am I? Am I like, when people say this all the time, you see this on Twitter, and I've even written an article with the same title called Not an Economic Zone. And it's like, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, we can point to thinkers like Spengler or Ernest Renan, or even American writers like Frederick Turner Jackson, which I've talked about extensively with the OGC. And it's just like, at that point, you are fundamentally reeling with the fact that the rot is so deep inside that you don't have an accurate understanding of the self.
Oh, so I just wanted to call attention to this line right here. Hazael says, men's club restrictions have been catastrophic. I'm a part of a very small one, but I don't know how we can do anything without getting throttled by the IRS. And that's a very important dimension to any sort of serious public coordination. Do you have any experience with that, about fraternal organizations getting fucked over by the state?
Actually, intentional communities and certain if you literally organize as a fraternity in the United States, you have more legal protections about who you can let in than you can as a religious institution.
Really?
Yeah.
51st state, here I come, buddy. I don't mind telling you. So
back to the
text. Well, everything we said actually does relate to the text. It might seem that we're in the weeds, but you'd be wrong, and you wouldn't be watching. The White World Revolution. We've been jumping around a bit, but that's one of the headings of one of the chapters, the White World Revolution. And this, I believe, summarizes what we're talking about. It's Bolshevism, but it's the larger revolution that encompasses also liberalism and the Enlightenment and all of it.
Can we jump to page 86?
Yes.
On the book, not the PDF, but like, you know what I mean? Because this is where we get to talk about culture, and I think this is where Spengler really gets to flesh out his organism versus like materialism argument. I think that's pretty important to consider. So yeah, it's section 2 down, or 11 down there. It's really important. So prior to this, of course, is the changes over state authority and productive economy, and of course he's referring to the time of ancient Rome. But we'll carry on here. He says, the revolution of more than a century in duration has fundamentally nothing to do with economics. It is a long disintegration period in the life of culture as a whole, considered as a living body. The inward form of life falls to pieces, and with it goes the power to give it outward expression through the creative works which collectively form the history of states, religions, and arts. After that power has matured to its extreme limits, the individual man with his private existence follows the trend of the whole. His doings, his attitude, intention, thought, experience inevitably form an element, however small, in this development. If he confuses this with purely economic questions, as Spengler points out, we all have, and our leaders do. This is why, from Carl Benjamin to Times and you have heard the phrase "fuck the GDP," because it's an important question. Yeah, cannibal rationalism that gets mentioned in here. Hey, look at you! Someone's read the. Hey! You're not supposed to read. That's our job, fucker.
Whoa. Traces IP.
Get him now. So anyways, it goes without saying that economic forms are just as much part of civilization as states, religions, and ideas and arts. But what is commonly meant by economics is not the forms of economic life that grow up and wither independently of human will, but the material product of economic activity, which nowadays is simply equated in the meaning of civilization and history, and decline of which is regarded materialistically and mechanistically as the cause and content of world catastrophe. So when we ignore the aspects of culture entirely, what formulates culture, and we look at things purely through Homo economicus, we are fundamentally masking the rot of our internal society with the smell of WD-40 and oil and cash and that whirring burnt plastic smell that you hear when you're mining for Bitcoin. That's what he's talking about. And he carries on and he says, the scene of this revolution of life, its foundation, at the same time its expression, is the megalopolis, which for those who've read Decline of the West, you should know what that is, which is found arising in all the late period of all cultures. Into this world of stone and petrification flock the ever-growing crowds of peasant folk, uprooted from the land, the masses, in the terrifying sense, formless human sand from which artificial and therefore fleeting figures can be needed, parties, organizations modeled on program and ideal, but in which that inherent power of growth and that course of the generation is saturated with tradition, and that most of all expresses itself in the fruitlessness of all life. That instinct for permanence of family and race is extinct. Sounds a little familiar like today now, doesn't it? The abundance of children, the chief sign of a healthy race, becomes tiresome and absurd. Where have I heard that before? This is the gravest sign of the egoism of the megalopolitans, those who have themselves become atoms of egoism, in which the opposite, not of present-day collectivism, between these two there are no difference. A pile of atoms is no more alive than a single one, but the urge to live in on the blood of posterity and the creature care for, the lastiness of the name. Cold intelligence, on the other hand, that solitary bloom, the weed of the pavement, sprouts in incredible masses. It is no longer the thrifty wisdom of old peasant families, which remains true as long as the stock to which it belongs to endures, but the mere intelligence of the day, of the daily papers, ephemeral literature, national assemblies, the bloodless intellect whose criticisms gnaws away everything that is left standing of the genuine. That is the naturally grown culture. And I think that that's sort of an important way to look at how, and of course, the next session talks about culture's growth and what actual culture looks like. But the reduction is the revolution that we're facing. And because that reduction, atomization, which has given rise to these materialist understandings, such as socialism, Bolshevism, and all forms thereof, and of course, even our liberal economic understanding of the world, has fundamentally allowed us to be rotted therein and makes it very easy for us to be replaceable. Spengler doesn't live, obviously, to see what comes after the war, but the formless sand, those masses of people that just only think about product or the consumption thereof, and those measures and papers, the NPCs of the world that are indistinguishable from the Hindu driving you on Uber in Dallas to the Ukrainian that is telling you how everything should be in Canada, is going to clearly indicate that that is the kind of mass and culture that we are. And a good example of it is here in the United States. There are 2 films in recent memory that are about products. Actually, 3 really in more recent memory. You have The Founder about Ray Kroc and McDonald's. You have that fucking Air Jordans one from Amazon. And then I think Disney Plus sponsored one about the history of the Flaming Hot Cheeto. When your culture is reduced down to the biographies of products, that culture is dead.
The only one that's good is BlackBerry. I actually like that one. But then there's also
there was a film about the BlackBerry, like the phone.
Yeah,
I did not know about that one.
With Glenn Howerton, who played Dennis from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's really good. It's actually one of the better. You don't think it's going to be as good as it is, but it is true. The Nike Air one was the most egregious example of that. But you saw that kind of work, and it kind of worked to the audience and the streaming platform setup that we have now. So it's like, yeah, why not? Like, the entire Netflix is kind of like Taco Bell, which is like, let's just be retarded. Retarded works. Like, what about the cool? Let's do a Lord of the Rings size trilogy about the Cool Ranch Dorito. Why not? You think people aren't going to watch that? You think people aren't going to watch that to death? Like, I wonder. Again, this I'm not trying to return to this.
I thought you were about to bring up the Denny's Hobbit menu, and I was like, oh no, not my Twitter memes.
A Denny's biopic is coming, like a Weird Al style Yankovic. Where okay, let's be silly. Look, it's a Denny's story. Let's be ridiculous, but you're still watching the Denny's movie, and they're still going to have the Denny's movie breakfast, and then the fucking obese maniacs are going to shovel that in their mouth. You know what I mean? Like it's just because it's ironic doesn't mean it's not fucking self-destructively genuine. And I'm not trying to keep bringing this up, but if we could cryogenically unfreeze Spengler's head, which is what I'm sure occurred, do you think he'd be an accelerationist? Because he'd be standing here in 2025. He makes some predictions.
I feel like he'd have a lot more in common with Land.
Like, I didn't
we're
want to
not
say
so
it.
different, you and I, my Anglo rival.
That's where I was
Actually,
going.
I disagree. I think that he would be so abhorred by what's going on that he would bash his head against the frozen case of like liquid hydrogen we encased him in so he could die one last time.
First of all, he would say, I should not be alive. By what?
Was ist das? And just like, breaks his head open against the glass.
It is for in every conceivable way Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin, but just the head. Just
little Futurama here, folks.
But I was saying, like, if he was here in 2025 and his predictions for the fall of the culture, the fall of the system, those did not come to pass. It survived and not limped on, but seemed to thrive in all of the worst conceivable ways, according to him. Would he just say, well, I guess the only way out is through, which in a lot of ways, that's where Nick lands, land acknowledgement, saying that there's no way to fight this, because that's where I was going with this inquiry, was saying that, a lot of people in the chat were saying that, fucking man, I just want a wife. I just want net zero Indians. Very simple folk, right? And even if we desire war, are we capable of desiring war outside of a materialist frame of reference? You know what I mean? Like, can we ever exit the liberal context? Is it even possible? Some would say no. So the only way out is through. And if Spengler were to behold what became of the greater American empire, we just say, well, I guess we just need to go faster and harder until, I don't know if he would use the phrase internal contradictions, but like, what else? It's not dying. It hasn't died. It's gotten bigger and worse. And it's about to, breach the atmosphere and start expanding across the, galactic field of stars, like it's, you know what I mean? Like, I wonder what he would say if he could see all of this and what his prescription would be. Speculate in the chat. Speculate amongst yourselves. Let me just move on here. Unless there was another part you wanted to read. I know that was...
No, I think that, that's sort of an important thing to consider, that, at least with culture and the atomization, because I think that it gets bathed over so much in our day-to-day discourse trademark that, excuse me, like, so oftentimes I think it's masked over for okay, traditional neighborhood development. I understand. Yeah,
totally nice day.
Totally nice day. Absolutely. I'm a smart urbanist. That's all I'm going to say. The traditional neighborhood development is okay with me. No, I think from there you can go to wherever you want to take us.
Okay, I had a part here. I'm trying to figure out if I want to read it here. I think you actually might have read this part. Hold on.
Oh,
so let me just do this. He gets into the Germanness here in page. Is it page 90 or is it page 99? Yeah, 90. All right, so let me just scroll down here. Anyway, I'll just read it. It says, Among Germanic races, it is called almost mystically honor. This honor was a force which permeated the lives of whole generations. Personal honor was only the sense of unqualified responsibility of the individual for the social honor, the professional honor, and the national honor. The individual shared the life of the community, and the existence of the others was at the same time his own. Whatever he did, the responsibility was shared by all who came after him, and in those days, it was not only a man's spirit that died when he was dishonored, when his own or his family's sense of honor had been mortally wounded, whether by his own fault or a stranger's. Everything that we call duty, the basis of all genuine rights, the original substance of every sort of dignity, may be traced back to honor. Here, as always, revolution begins from above, only to make way presently for revolts from below. Quote unquote universal rights have from time immemorial been given to those who had not even thought of claiming them, but society rests upon the inequality of men, and that at bottom is the intention. We do not seek to alter and improve, but to destroy. In every society's degenerate elements sink constantly to the bottom. Exhausted families, downfallen members of generations of high breed, spiritual and physical failures and inferiors. It is the dregs of the great cities, the genuine mob, the underworld in every sense, which everywhere constitute the opposition to the great and noble world and unite in their hatred of it. Political and literary bohemia, wastrel nobility, shipwrecked. I love this part, just him listing these people. See if you can find someone you know in here.
Tag yourselves.
Shipwrecked academians, adventurers and speculators, criminals and prostitutes, loiterers and the feeble-minded, mixed with a few pathetic enthusiasts for some abstract ideal. For once more it be said, the opposite of noble is not poor, but vulgar. So in this section, he's really getting into the Bolshevik Revolution, and I'm reminded of a tweet from someone I don't particularly like, Mystery Grove, but it works, where he said, I'm going to summarize here, everyone knows what I'm talking about, when he says, was it leftism is
He says
just...
communism is just like the hideous, ugly freaks.
Yeah, just trying to destroy things that are beautiful. And you might think that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but you know, the more you think about it, the older you get, you're like, yeah, that actually is all it is. After you get into all the debates with them and try to unpack their ideology and their theory, I'm like, no, you just hate things that are good. You hate hierarchy because you're the bottom of it. You hate things that are beautiful because you're not that. You hate things that are expensive because you can't afford it. It's all based on bitterness. That's really all it is. That's why everything can be so contradictory, and they have no problem with it. But yeah, he's just describing the fringes, the margins, and you know, I like when he said the revolution starts from above to empower revolutions from below. He spends a great amount of time discussing that, and we can carry that through when he talks about. He spends quite a bit of time on high culture, you know, because it's easy to say it's the ugly revolt against the beautiful. Okay, but what do you mean the beautiful? What do you mean high culture? I hear people talk about it all the time. Very rarely is it explained in any substantive way, but it says high culture is inseparably bound up with luxury and wealth. Luxury, that matter of course environment of things of culture that belongs spiritually to one's personality, is a premises of all creative periods. The birth of a great art, for instance, is not possible at the present time because the true artistic life died out with the last century. Then it had its home in, quote, in society, where connoisseurs and the creators of important works could meet, and not amongst art dealers, art critics, and snobs, the people or the public. And wealth collected in the hands of a few and among the ruling classes is, amongst other things, the foundation for the training of generations of leading minds through the example of a highly developed environment, without which there's no healthy economic life and no development of political talent. It was only then that the social revolution began to have the economic tendency, which found expression in agitators' theories. And this tendency was concerned not with the organization and aims of the economic system, but with the monetary value of its investments and products. Contrasts between rich and poor were created in order to start the struggle between them. The idea was that everything available for turning into money should be shared or held in common. If possession of it could not be attained, it was to be destroyed, so that others should not continue to possess it. From this way of feeling and thinking, not of the lower orders of society, but of their self-nominated spokesmen, everything arose that in the classical age was called the equal distribution of goods, and today is called class war and socialism. So when he talks about the white world revolution, just to bring it back to this, would it, and correct me if I'm wrong, would it be fair to say that the white world revolution could best be summarized as materialism? And with that, with materialism, I would include the scientific revolution. And we covered this in our show before, but I think the scientific revolution predates.
I think yes, but you need to also give it the, Christian moral or call to action, at least as a superstructure. Like it needs to be there, because I mean, it is the commandment of like do good unto others to help the least of the poor. You see a lot of, and he points this out, like a lot of, like, even the term class war comes from a French Catholic priest during the French Revolution.
And that all seems true as well. You know, I mean, like, even like social democrats, and I am calling him one, like Sohrab Ahmari, the Iranian turned Catholic turned progressive. I mean, he's always was. Let's not kid ourselves. He quotes in his book Tyranny Inc. He quotes James, the epistle, the general Catholic epistle of St. James, to talking about like the poor and the gold and how it'll all be eaten away and how cursed the rich are, without really considering that Christianity is a renunciation and you were to be doing like the charitable works in private. Like, this is why I always like laugh when I hear people like, well, you just don't want to help people. How can you be a Christian? It's just like, I'm told to do my good works in secret and not to have my reward of, you know, being pharisaical and publicly announcing what a heckin' good person I am, which is why, like, your libtard that says, be a heckin' good person, bro, or look at how I've done all this good, is no different than the Jewish Pharisee in first century Judea. But that's a conversation for a later time. Yes, as a card-carrying Catholic, I was not thrilled by the, what would we call that? The touching of the ice, in the blessing of the melting ice in the name of climate change. Just like weird stunts, you know, political stunts you're seeing from the clergy, from the priest, from the fucking Pope himself. You know, it's just like they're doing, you know, graffiti art shows and shit like that. It's all just very, very silly. We should do that. Look, you can believe or disbelieve climate change in secret where it belongs. But also, like, there is a very extensive history of I mean, I guess you can make the case that there was always a priest on both sides of the conflict. Like, there's no shortage of, you know, Christian fascist collaborators, but also communist collaborators.
Cordrianu, most of the German Catholics that had sided with the Reich.
Yeah.
Joseph de Maistre, most famous, you know, anti-French revolutionary, devout Catholic.
Yeah, so I know a lot of anti-Christians will hear this and say, aha, we wouldn't have gay race communism without Christianity. But I'm like, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's accurate. So just pump the brakes on that. But he continues on here, just skipping ahead here to 105.
Like, even the divine right of kings in the English sense was defended by a guy that, if you ever read Sir Robert Filmer's Patriarcha, it is literally just like, because God said so.
I wanted to read that. I never got a chance to. That was from
It's
Imperial
really
Press.
worth your time, because this is the thing that Locke responds to in the Second Treatise of Government, and then they never teach you to read that in college.
Yeah, like, I know Imperium Press, I believe it was them, released a copy of a version of that. So I got to check that out. Now he continues on here. This is a section called Class War and Bolshevism specifically. He says, this revolution does not commence with the materialistic socialism of the 19th century, still less with the Bolshevism of 1917. It has been in permanence since the middle of the 18th century. It was then that rational criticism, proudly named the philosophy of the Enlightenment, began to turn its attention from theological systems of Christianity and the traditional world philosophy of scholarship to the facts of actuality, the state, society, and finally the evolved forms of economics. It commenced by depriving the concepts of nations, a right government, of their historical content, and interpreting the difference of the rich and poor quite materialistically as a moral contrast, which was insisted upon by the agitators rather than honestly believed. The Paris clubs, particularly the Feuillants and Jacobins, were nothing but copies of the English in their programs, their organization of branches all over France, and the form of their agitation, while the English, in turn, translated citoyen, the French form of address between two members, into citizen, and the newly coined citizenness, and adopted further the phrase liberty, equality, fraternity, and the designation tyrants for kings. This active liberalism progressed from Jacobism to Bolshevism logically. So he's trying to pull at the roots of what he believes Bolshevism actually was. Now, what do you think? We're in the section of Bolshevism now. Is there anything you want to jump to or say on that topic?
I think one of the things that it kind of echoes even in today's discourse since the war in Ukraine has started, and you've seen this on all sides of that issue. But I'm instantly reminded of, where you hear we hear our lovely phrase like the vast Asiatic hordes. You get it from this book, at least I think you do. It's certainly mentioned quite a lot. Basically, that Russia towards the end of the 19th century had effectively become part of what we would know as the European project. We wouldn't include the Ottomans, but because of the westernizing reforms of Peter the Great and others, that Russia becomes quasi-European. It becomes a white Russian. And that falls after the revolution and the martyrdom of the Romanovs. And so he basically claims that the Soviets are, the part of the Asiatic hordes, the Mongolian, the Khanates and the rest like that. And that the other thing to consider too is that this ideology of resentment and materialistic deism, so to speak, has effectively now given you a great tool to be used by your enemies. And towards the end of the text, we talked about like the colored world revolutions. He also brings out some of the same points that Stoddard mentions, which is the numerical advantage that the non-Western, i.e. the non-white world has. And that also, historically speaking, despite the interscene squabbles of Europe, there were greater existential threats to look at. But because our scientific materialism, our sort of rational humanism has superseded God, culture, and to a large extent, the older meanings of racial identity. There are not a lot of Western powers that are ready to stand firm against the greater hordes of our time in comparison to, say, Islam or the Ottoman Empire of a century prior. And that he thinks really, truly at that point, the unified German state, and now especially under the Reich, has that position to do so. And you get a very German perspective at how that plays out.
Yeah, there's something you just mentioned there that is so striking, and he gets into this later in the book where he's pointing out that the seeds, when he talks about the color, we're in the white world revolution where he's talking about liberalism, materialism. He talks about the colored world revolution, which is sort of communist international and third worldism, you could call it that. But he points out, and I do think this is true, especially during this time, that so much of that revolution was seeded from the West. I mean, seeded as in planting seeds, that they did not generate their own literature, their own theory. All of this sort of revolutionary rhetoric was implanted there from French writers, from Anglo writers, and then over time they produced their own texts. Most of the time they didn't. But interestingly enough, I actually think Black Americans have created so much of their own, theory behind this, maybe more than any other group on Earth. I'm talking about sort of leftist revolutionary literature, of course, but I can't think of another historical example where the seeds of the revolution against one side were seeded by that very side. Like you wouldn't have, and he makes this case in the book, you would not have the colored world revolution without the white world revolution, meaning the colored world revolution is not only indirectly but directly caused by political agitators within the white world. Like that's wild. That would be like, if China was inspiring a Mongol invasion by dropping scrolls all throughout the fucking steppe lands, like that would be fucking, you know what? That would actually be fucking bananas, if I do say so myself. So moving on here, he talks about that right here. I'm gonna just skip ahead to 170 here. He goes on here. He says, even by 1900, the danger was immense. The structure of the white economic system was already undermined. It threatened to break down at the first world historical upheaval under the load of the political wage, the reduced hours of work that men would stand, the saturation of all foreign markets, and the emergence of foreign industrial areas which were outside the jurisdiction of white labor parties. Only the unbelievable peace after 1870, which was diffused over the white world by its statesmen's dread of making incalculable decisions, maintained the universal delusion vis-a-vis the catastrophe that was approaching with sinister speed. Then came the Great War, and with it, not caused by it, but merely no longer averted, the economic collapse of the white world. It would have come in any case, only more slowly and in less appalling forms. But this war was waged from the first by England, the home of practical labor socialism, for the economic destruction of Germany, the youngest great power, the economic unit which was developing the most rapidly and on superior lines, and for her the perpetual exclusion as a competitor in the world's markets. So not very friendly to the Anglo world right there, would you say?
Not at all.
Yeah, so
this is a pretty I think that you hear a lot of similar what would later become like what we would call National Socialist economics, or even just sort of the paleoconservative arguments about free trade. Like they're here, or at least like a germ of them are here.
Yeah, and just I wanted to mention this because I have an excerpt here that was taken from a different copy of the book. And so I don't have the page number here, but it was pulled from this book. And this is the quote where he describes the roots of the white world revolution. He says, now all communist systems in the West are in fact derived from Christian theological thought. More's Utopia, the sun state of the Dominica Campanella, the doctrines of Luther's disciples, Karlstadt and Thomas Munzer, and Fichte state socialism, what Fourier, St. Simon, Owen, Marx, and hundreds of others dreamed and wrote on the ideals of the future, reaches back quite without their
Page
knowledge.
129.
Yeah, okay, perfect. For a while, I thought I hallucinated.
No. I have that section highlighted.
Yeah, quite with other knowledge, which had their secret part in economic reasoning and in public opinion on social questions. How much of Thomas Aquinas's law of nature and conception of state is still to be found in Adam Smith, and therefore with the opposite sign in the Communist Manifesto. Christian theology is the great-grandmother of Bolshevism. Since the beginning of the rationalist age, that is, since 1750, there is materialism both with and without Christian terminology. Now, I had that highlighted because that's a bit of a departure from what we were just talking about, but it is related. Now, what do you think of that? What is your read on that? We could probably spend a long time on that, but do you agree or disagree? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that most Christians who are on the right would argue that this is true, and that this is the problem of trying to take God out of the equation, or again, like I mentioned, like to do things publicly and to enforce it. Now, don't get me wrong, there have been Christian empire, there has been Christian leadership in the past, but had always had a different recognition that there was something to hold you to a higher account, whether it be the public opinion in which you lose your head or the sense that your own immortal soul would be gravely at risk. And you have the history of that, like St. Ambrose of Milan rebuking the emperor and such. But no, I mean, like, also Christianity had become at that point the dominant religion of the West, and had been for several hundred years at that point, and had, with the Catholic Church and even after the Reformation, both had seen their power and their influence in every part of our political understanding, whether it's the Munster Rebellion or the Avignon debacle when it comes to the papacy. Like, there are these very real aspects of political power that are infused with the understanding of the theology. And so when you have a radical offshoot that wishes to deny God, and we need to be very clear with ourselves, every communist and Marxist we have seen has tried to emulate Christianity. The Soviets famously had Lenin's corpse on display, like you would see a saint's incorrupt relics. You had, of course, the communists and the socialists in the Spanish Civil War literally, dig up the bones of nuns and priests and desecrate statues and so on. So, I mean, yeah, I would agree that a lot of this does come from Christian theology, and I can trace it to it. However, it behooves any Christian on the right to call this shit out and to squash it and to correct it. But at the same time, like, I understand the polemic, because there is truth to it. There is a K line from Christian moral doctrine to people who wish to bring heaven on earth, so to speak, to immanentize the eschaton. I think that's an important thing to consider here. Like, I don't disagree with this argument. It gets thrown in my face a lot, sure, but I think that there are plenty of Christians that have died fighting this, and you can look towards how Christianity has fought it, or has, like, Cordriano. Like, I hate to reference Cordriano here, but like, even Cordriano is like, I am willing to damn myself to hell if it means I provide like the political salvation of my people.
Yeah, I mean, what is that if not martyrdom in the most extreme
no
sense?
greater love than this, than man hath.
There's sort of cool dude here. It says you guys should cover Cadre News books, but that might get you nuked from YouTube. We did. I covered Cadre News books. I covered For My Legionaries on Blood Satellite. I don't know if you ever did. Maybe it does get you nuked. There's nothing terribly offensive in it.
No, I don't think so.
Once you read, I think it's very interesting. I would recommend it. I think For My Legionaries might not be the best place to start. I liked it, but it's kind of disjointed and incomplete. It ends with it ends with his assassination, basically, but it's a lot of excerpts. It's a lot of incomplete essays. I think it's good. It's actually one of the better strategy documents I think I've ever read. If you want to know what it was like on the ground in Romania at that time, it's very good. He's got other writings that are like that, but I think there's probably some other ones I could give. But these days, maybe not. I don't know. You could probably see Martyr made out there covering Mein Kampf, and he'd get away with it. I mean, these days you can do.
I wouldn't be surprised if he ever does cover it. I mean, he also covered the same book you and I covered years ago, which was What Went Wrong, which I was surprised that he covered it. But yeah, I'm finding that book was like finding a mountain of gold.
Yeah, and I'd recommend all these books. I will say the one I was least impressed by was Oswald Mosley's autobiography. I'm not sure what I make of him, like as a figure within that larger ecosystem of not even figure, just figure, leader. I'm like, if you read him back to back with these other guys, like, I think this guy kind of sucks. I think he's kind of not interesting. He's kind of just like a rich kid and it seemed that whereas with Hitler, his movement was truly revolutionary. But you look at, even if you don't like Hitler, okay, the thing he was doing was revolutionary. But you look at Oswald Mosley, and he didn't seem to particularly dislike the status quo in England. It was more of a reform thing, if anything. Like, he was still a parliamentarian. He liked the parliament. He would never. I don't think he even had it.
He was an institutional reformist.
Yeah, that's all he was. And he had a flair for public speaking, of course. No one doubts that. And he had some cool shirts, and he had his street guys. But I'm like, this was a guy who, if elected, probably wouldn't change much. I think he might be slightly more isolationist, and then probably walk that back later. So anyway, we're just getting off track here entirely. But I want, and we could end on this. I wanted to see if we could just land on the colored revolution, which we've been mentioning. And I found that this is where he spent the most time speaking about race, whereas everything was about, politics before now. But he gets into his opinions on what race is. I think he ends it very, very well. Did you mind jumping to that, or did you want to cover more about Bolshevism?
No, I think we can jump real quick to that section, and then maybe end briefly on. Let's just go from there. I think you and I are on the same page.
I think someone also had mentioned in the chat, I think it was Sean Weiland saying, I love hearing Dimes drink whiskey. I am only drinking water. What I was drinking previously was a Rockstar energy drink, which I typically do when I'm live streaming.
I opened a Dr. Pepper at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, I gotta have my Rockstar. It's a fruit punch.
That is the most Wigger of energy drinks, I think.
Rockstar, zero sugar. It's like 10 calories or whatever, no sugar, but also the fruit punch flavor is very, very good.
I stand by my claim.
It is. I think there might be. Okay, you fucked up. Can I tell you how?
How?
I found the most Wiggerish one.
What is it?
I don't know if it's only in Canada though, but they think they sell it only at gas stations here. It's called Joker Mad Energy.
Hold on, let's see if I can get that in the U.S.
Yeah, it's actually really good, but it's like 300 calories.
You can get it at a Circle K.
Yeah. It's something crazy. It's like 300 calories.
No, you can get it here in the U.S.
And there's one. It's a cherry limeade. It's really good, but it's got like an evil clown Joker on the fucking front of it.
You know that it's gotten attention when the review bra has reviewed it while he's drinking it out of a martini glass.
Yeah, it's good, but that would be the most Wiggerish. I guess, yeah, and then Rockstar would be. I drink it for the flavor. I read it for the articles. I
watch porn for the plot. I understand.
I watch porn for the ads. I want to see what the pre-rolls are.
I'm saying $1 million idea and a great way to probably win some medical lawsuits. You need to be report of the week, but you're just reviewing gas station dick pills.
I love the idea of a guy who watches porn just for the furniture. like he's just.
Oh, honey, you're gonna ruin the upholstery.
He's just into interior design. He's like, I'm really liking that. Fuck, it's all just.
Call me Ben Gibbard, because that's the death of an interior decorator right there.
If only Spengler could see us now.
He'd kill us both with his bare hands.
I'm trying to. I think we've also fucked up. Hold on. We've gone this entire time without showing the Spengler face. You know what I'm talking about. Let me see if I can. I'm looking up Google image search here. No, I need.
Are you trying to find the Spengler looking at the computer one?
Oh no, just his face, like the famous one. It's none of them are big enough. Fuck, I hate Google image search. I'm gonna blow my fucking brains out. Okay, here we go. Don't fuck me on this. What's Posterazzi? Okay.
I think it's over.
Why doesn't anything work? You ever wonder that? You ever wonder why?
Have I ever wondered why Google keeps getting worse? Yeah, I have. It has everything.
Look, here we go.
Here you go.
This is the guy. This is the face you get when we're talking about watching porn for the furniture. When we're talking about a review of the week, but for dick pills.
Yeah, speaking of...
Alex McNabb's dad. Sorry, what?
Yikes. Speaking of race, it is not intended in the sense that which in the fashion is among anti-Semites in Europe and America to use it today. Darwinistically, materialistically, race purity is a grotesque word in the view of the fact that for centuries all stocks and species have been mixed, that warlike, that is, healthy generations with a future before them have from time to time immemorial always welcomed a stranger into the family if he had race. To whatever race that he had belonged. Those who talk too much about race no longer have it in them. What is needed is not a pure race, but a strong one, which has a nation within it. There's some slight criticisms against the incoming German government at this time. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I thought that he phrases it well there about what he means by race.
What does he mean by that?
Because the way, he would say the way we view race right now is very materialistically. We're obsessed with eye color, hair color, and the qualitative or spiritual implications of that. But he would say this is all maybe even ornamental. Like what is the result of that? Because you could also say, hey, look, there's blonde haired, blue eyed people in the world right now, and they seem to be behaving like a bunch of fucking fags. You know, that's what he was. So, what are they missing? What are they lacking? That sort of racial or civilizational drive. That's what he's trying to grab hold of. And so, I think I agree with that. So, when he talks about race, it's completely different than how we would describe it. And that's what I was going to read. But actually, hold on a second.
Glad we're on the same page.
Hold on. Let me just pull this up again here. Okay, there. I'm trying to skip ahead because he continues on here in page 225. 225. Here, he says, furthermore, barbarism is that which I call strong race, the eternal warlike in the type of the beast of prey man. It often seems to have ceased to exist, but is crouching in the soul, ready to spring, given a big challenge, and is on top of the enemy. It is dead only where late urban pacifism, with its weary desire and peace at any price, short of that of its own life, has rolled its mud over the generations. That is the spiritual self-disarmament following on the physical, which comes of unfruitfulness. Why is the German people the least exhausted of the white world, and therefore the one which may be placed the most hope? Because its political past has given it no opportunity to waste its precious blood and its great abilities. This is the one blessed aspect of our wretched history since 1500, and has used us sparingly. So I like that, what we call the strong race, the eternal warlike in the type of beast of prey man. And again, circling right back to the beginning when we said, you know, the human history is a history of war at the base of everything. When we talk about vitality, when we talk about strength of will, I said right at the start, it is the capacity for great and terrible things. I think that's the most, you know, YouTube friendly way of saying it. It's like what are the distances you would go for your own, not only survival, because I think that casts us in a prey position. I like that terminology. Like we're over here, as someone said in the chat. Like,
He also calls academics that too.
Yeah, like I just want a fucking wife. I just want a game. I just want to, you know, I
just want a grill.
I just want to live in the 1960s, and I think that might be dying out soon, because that seems like a sensible desire, and you're denied a sensible desire. So then everyone's going to say, okay, well, what I want is bloody universal conquest. What I want, like that great image of the Chad saying, wearing the shirt that says "annihilate everything that exists." I think people would see that as a joke.
But it's also, but a lot of people I think would look at that, and I think Spengler might as well, as an exhaustive performatism.
Yeah.
Like an exhausted performance. Like it's a ghost dance almost.
It is. I do wonder if it's also normalization, though, because
I think it's. I would agree. I think because everyone is. I would agree with that. Like on one hand, I think that some people LARP, obviously, but yeah, it was cultural and linguistic, yeah. But there's also blood and soil to it. It's got a little bit of everything. No, I think Step Lords did mix to a certain degree. So true. Just ask every Chi, Hao, and Kwong and see what you get. But I was out of jokes. That was terrible. I think there is a normalization to it, because I think that's the thing is that no one, every guy knows on this side of things, like if you were to do something, it's over for you. Like if you get caught or you are the first to go to jail, because like your life's functionally over, right? Like you're done. And I think that's the thing is that everyone wants violence, and it's normalized to such a degree that, yeah, if we meme about it, if we talk about it, and we say this is what I voted for every time we see some fat liberal get pushed by ICE, like maybe we are priming someone to finally do something. And everyone kind of has deep down in the back of their head somewhere that little hope that maybe someone does something. But that borderlines on a conversation, maybe not for YouTube, but it does bear discussion the same way that Sorrell writes about it on violence, which I know you've discussed and I've read.
Mm-hmm.
It's well worth visiting for maybe a future episode.
Yeah, it's one of those ones I think about. I don't think about the entirety of it, but I think of a few key points he makes very often, and the central truth that he's trying to get at, which was that if you're truly revolutionary, you can never negotiate with power. Like if you're fighting against the system, you must follow through and destroy it. Whereas what most revolutionaries do is they cause enough disruption and discord that they're invited to the negotiating table with power. And then usually they're granted boons and status for the leaders of the revolution. And then the entire thing, it has the wind taken out of its sails. Whereas he's like, this ends with you. It has to end with you hanging people. That's the only reason you're doing this.
But we also have to contextualize when this is being written. And this is like, we're near the very end of the book. But like one of the things he talks about is like, why is the white Western world, it's about, what's the word he uses? Next page here. It's how far, in fact, have the white nations advanced towards pacifism? Is the outcry against war an intellectual gesture or a serious abdication from history at the cost of dignity, honor, and liberty? Yet life is war. Can we dismiss its meaning and yet retain it? That is what the craving for the peace of felidom, or the fellaheen, for protection against everything that disturbs the daily routine, against destiny in every form that would seem as intimate, a sort of protective mimicry vis-a-vis world history, human insects feigning death in the face of danger, the happy ending of an empty existence, the boredom which has brought in jazz music and Negro dancing to perform at the dead march for a great culture. But this must not be. The hare may perhaps deceive the fox, but human beings cannot deceive each other. And then you get some more interesting takes as he reads thereon. But I think that's sort of, we have to contextualize this too. Like this is the post-war era between World War I and World War II. America and France and England have pushed for arms control, have pushed all these great treaties, which we in the United States, we had to end up rejecting. The Senate said, fuck this, and rejected any sort of amendments that would allow us to join the League of Nations, that would allow for arms control, that would allow for fleet proportions, although all these things were proposed. And that we saw, and as Spengler had noted, we saw how impotent this was because the League of Nations failed. The United Nations functionally fails. And for Spengler, he points out you can only imitate and act like a diplomat for so long before history must resume itself, because man is an animal of war. And not to, fuck it. Just do the whole Blood Meridian judge quote about how war is waited for its ultimate practitioner.
There was a couple times I was going to quote Blood Meridian throughout this. I'm like, I can't do it. Then Prude will get mad at me.
Cormac McCarthy-san, is that you? Yes, it is, Chud. I'm here to tell you high school love doesn't wait forever. But actually, it does.
I'm here to tell you that this book is unfilmable. Ugh, you ever hear that? You ever hear that we can never film it? It's the most.
I hear every 4 or 5 years that someone tries to make Blood Meridian a book. And honestly, if you're gonna do it, just make it like an HBO or Showtime miniseries.
Motherfucker, it's more filmable.
You made Deadwood. You can make this happen.
Blood Meridian is more filmable than the script for The Counselor, which Cormac McCarthy wrote. Shut the fuck up. It's not that complicated a fucking story. It's almost written like a film. If you just hack off the first quarter where he's with the hermit, which is the part I remember the most for some godforsaken reason. But yeah, you could do it. You can do it in a miniseries. It's right fucking there. They kind of started doing it with Red Dead Redemption too. Figure it out. This is how we end every show. We're just getting into the fucking.
We're getting into the weeds of our pop culture references. This will be us when we go towards our, as we slip this mortal coil. Be like, Cormac, and then just.
One of my favorite bits we did was imagining all of us in the retirement home, just Geo dying of Alzheimer's. It's just, I think, the very end of the book. There's just one last section here, and maybe it's a good place to end here. He says,
"You ready for it?"
It says, "Great history is exacting. It devours the racially best elements. It devoured ancient Rome in a few centuries. The Nordic migrations, which had come to a standstill in southern Europe 1,000 years before, set in again on the grand scale on the discovery of America, taking oceans in their stride. Vigorous Spanish families of predominantly Nordic origin migrated in numbers to the new continent, where they could fight, explore, and rule. By about 1800, the best aristocracy of the Spanish stamp was there, and vigorous life had died out in the mother country. Similarly, the class in France whose vocation was to rule was used up by high policy by Louis XIII onwards, and not by that alone, for high culture must be paid for dearly too, and the Anglo-Saxon has been used up even more by the British Empire. What was left became conservative, which in this case is meant uncreative, tired, full of unproductive hatred of everything new and unforeseen. So I liked that part. I liked him describing sort of the migratory vitality of these people. You know, I was discussing this recently with someone, I can't remember who, in one of the chats about Hans Hermann Hoppe, his book, A Democracy, the God That Failed. And Hoppe gets oftentimes dismissed as a libertarian, but I thought that was one of the better books I've seen. You know, I don't think he would argue that he's seen as a libertarian, but it was very, very good. And I remember this one section near the end of the book when he was talking about sort of the people as a nation, or what is it that survives the collapse of a state apparatus. When an empire falls or a nation state falls, can a nation state fall and the nation remain? What becomes of the people? What is that essence, that sort of horizontal unity, something that isn't just bound up in the organs of power, the mechanisms of the state? And I like that you're seeing that echoed here. Like there's something about the great essence of people that can move around, bound up in these great families, in these dynasties, in these great individuals that can be transplanted elsewhere. And that might be what it needs to survive, because he said even as the empire exhausts, maybe perhaps as rats leaving the sinking ship, or maybe the seeds of a great civilization as, you know, Rome was founded and with the remnants of Troy, and Britain was founded. Like, it seems every great civilization can also trace its roots to a previous civilization in some way in its mythology. I don't know. I think there's something there. There's something interesting, again, in his description of the race and those who are tasked with carrying it forward. You know, find not only is it's bound up in blood and soil, but can it find new blood and soil and evolve in that direction? What do you think about all that? I gave you a bunch of shit there.
Well, I think that fundamentally shows the Germanic perspective that Spengler points out, which is that he wants this to survive, and he means, and also that he thinks that Caesarism, or the preconfiguration of power, is an eternal concept that cannot go away. And so, you know, he had says, I'm just going to read the last two paragraphs, and I think that might be a good way to end it here. And he says, the fascist formations of this decade will pass into new, unforeseeable forms, and even present-day nationalism will disappear. There remains a formative power, only the warlike Prussian spirit, everywhere and not in Germany alone. Destiny, once compacted in meaningful forms and great traditions, will now proceed to make history in terms of formless individual powers. Caesar's legions are returning to consciousness. Here, possibly, even in our own century, the ultimate decisions are waiting for their man. In the presence of these little aims and notions of our current politics sink into nothing. He whose sword compels victory here will be lord of the world. The dice are ready for this stupendous game. Who dares to throw them?
I know there was someone in the
It's
chat.
a little different in 2025 rather than probably 1933 when he wrote this, but it's damn good prose.
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything found here is incorrect. I don't think any of the predictions were necessarily wrong. There was one part we didn't cover where he was saying, here's what will happen with the United Kingdom. It was basically true. You know, it did end up, and this was pre-World War II, and the trajectory of Russia, and even he was talking about the rise of American ascendancy at a time where maybe that wasn't taken for granted as it is right now. But yeah, so I don't think this book has been really incorrect about anything. There's not a whole lot I would debate with. We could hash it out about the peculiarities of the Christian analysis, but overall I liked it. Overall, I think it's pretty great. And a lot of people were excited about this, so I think there was a lot of interest in it. And you, was this impactful on you when you had read it initially?
I bought it in a vast collection of books. I bought this alongside the memoirs of George Kennan, which I didn't have an older edition of, which I bought, and I bought 2 books from William Appleman Williams, which was Empire as a Way of Life and The Tragedy of American Foreign Policy, or no, Tragedy of American Diplomacy. And I read this, and it's one of those gut punches where you read something that feels like it fundamentally was correct and never lived. Like it just fundamentally, it came true in all the worst ways. And you're kind of like left being depressed in the same way that like you can read Appleman Williams and like he's a very like new left kind of critic of American imperialism, but like you see his K line from Frederick Turner Jackson, and you end up coming to this reactionary conclusion about the trials and tribulations of how like American democracy after the frontier closed ended up becoming this like materialistic boondoggle that doesn't focus on the American nation and its people. And you're like, oh fuck, like that's true. And like he was writing this like 60 years ago, like that's even worse. And he's like the Contra Kennan too, which made it all the more interesting to see how all these guys kind of came to very similar conclusions from vastly different schools of thought. And I gave it to a girl I dated during the summer of Floyd. Ooh, EL, I hope you married her. And if not, I hope you got your books back after you got your shit wrecked, or you wrecked hers, who knows. But no, I like when I read this again, I read it today, preparing for this, like you and I had covered very similar things. I could feel this heightened sense of something's going to happen. And of course, something did happen. Spengler doesn't get to live to see the Second World War break out or the tragedy of what happens to Europe thereafter. But I think his comparisons about the revolution is true because we were governed by Bolshevism. Bolshevism still governs us. And the great powers of Europe, and to a large extent, even the white American political aristocracy, has effectively decided to die comfortably. And I think that there are still the youth of its day that wishes to see Caesar, and that maybe we'll get one, whether in my lifetime or our children's lifetime, I don't know. But I walked away from the book definitely feeling like I understand why he wrote it, because you don't have to like Adolf at all. You don't have to like Adolf at all, but I don't think you can deny him his spot as a great man of history.
Yeah, I've made that argument before. I mean, recall that he was Time Magazine's Man of the Year. So, I mean, hey, you don't get to be Man of the Year for at least being in the runnings for being a great man. But just the simple metric that, can anyone not talk about Hitler for a day? Is there a day that goes by in 2025 where Hitler isn't brought up in countries other than Germany? Like, you know what I mean? So I'm like,
the United States.
I'm going to say he might end up being the greatest man of the 21st century. Like, honestly, just by social and cultural relevance alone, more than Lincoln. When's the last time you heard anyone bring up Lincoln outside of the Old Glory Club conference?
Anytime that an Asian libtard wants to talk shit about white people.
Asians love Lincoln? Is that what they're saying?
Well, I mean, American liberal immigrants who love Lincoln will mention Lincoln and Reconstruction as a way to hate on like the last part of the United States where there's still a functional like regional white ethnic identity.
It'd be so funny, an Asian guy dressed like Hitler. I mean, no, sorry, Lincoln, but also that.
Well, there was that Asian guy who dressed like a Confederate soldier.
Asian Lincoln.
Asian Lincoln. 4 squad 7 years ago. This is how I get in trouble.
But he only learned about Lincoln from watching animatronics, so he's trying to be Lincoln, but he's just like karate chopping the fucking air.
You're a House of Wax figure. Use your karate chop action. There you go. There's another reference for you and your kids.
Oh, no, that one. No, that's the film I've only watched 30 times in the past month.
I think this was a great episode.
No, I loved it.
I'm gonna go pat myself on the back.
We're gonna have to follow this up with.
I have one super chat.
Okay, go ahead.
So he goes.
Oh wait, hold on. First one, John here, General Lee. With the
General Lee. Puts a whole new definition to yellow belly now, doesn't it?
Yo, I love slavery.
Roar, gar. Yeah. No. I'm gonna disappoint the shit out of Wingman when I put that fucking review out because I was not as positive about it as he was. He says, "Great job with this, man." He says, "This is the reason why I wanted you and Cap to do that K-pop Demon Hunters movie review. That's why I paid the money for it." He says, "I'm in the military and my unit plays the songs at every PT. Well, I'm sorry you have brain worms." But I recorded a review with Cap earlier last week. I'm gonna just go put it on the channel members section because there's like a 3-minute like diatribe about circumcision on there that I may edit out for general audiences, as if I don't get in trouble enough as it is. But no, I did record it. I'll put it up later. And then Big Ben sends $10 on YouTube and he says, "I read Spengler's numbers bit on Prude's recommendation. It was bad. Then you read it wrong." Then you read it because I am a contrarian, and I will tell you if you read Form and Actuality and you read the chapter on mathematics and numbers, I think it's one of the most important things that Spengler talks about that no one on our side of things gets to discuss. And I will tell people to read it all the time. And one of these days, someone will be like, "I understand now." But until then, that day has not happened. But thank you, nevertheless, Big Ben, for your money.
I can always tell when the Blood Satellite fans are swooping in and piping up. Of course, Abraham Lincoln Buckbreaker.
I like that though because I'm thinking about that movie Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, except now he's just like looking for down low brothers that are as sweet as a sugar plum.
Big Ben says he's smarter than you.
That's nice, Big Ben.
Ooh, you gonna take that?
Well, I'm the one with the show. He isn't.
I was just laughing at the idea of the guy. He's like, I'm on active duty, and we like to listen to. And I'm just imagining just a scene right out of fucking Apocalypse Now. You got the helicopters going in there in Vietnam, of course. Instead of "It ain't me, it ain't me," it's just they're listening to podcasts, and it's just Geo going, "No, no, 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 no." Just flying.
I have a friend of mine who's in the Air National Guard, and he's like, yeah, he's the NCO IC of the place where he's at. He's like, I just my entire like guys are all radicalized because I play you, Morgoth, and Orin all the time on like the TV in the conference room, and we just listen to right-wing podcasts all day. And he's like, you have no idea how debilitating it was to like go get sent to the Caribbean with all this Venezuela shit, and then find out everyone's a libtard.
I'm trying to like this is a bit like the worst podcast you could listen to when you're going to war.
The worst podcast that you could go to going to war is listening to anything from the American Mind and the Claremont Institute.
Man, just listening to honestly, it'd be so funny if they were all just watching Review Bra. Like,
they're watching the gas station dick pill review bra because they're waiting to get their weekend pass.
It's the very first scene of that movie Warfare. I don't know if you saw that one.
I did, yeah.
It's all the guys at the TV getting riled up and beating their chest and go, "Arr!" And it's just fucking Review Bra reviewing a new type of Mountain Dew.
I'm straight up not having a Baja Blast here, guys.
I'm not having a Bob. All right, we're over 2 hours now. We gotta get going. Thank you, everyone. I think you got all your.
No, he sent one more. He says that's fine. I saw the watch party you did with Cap and Mike. Someone called a biblical figure a hard R within the first 5 minutes. 100% worth the investment for you to review the film. Thank you. Yeah, I think that was Cap or Mike that had called someone the gamer word in reference to the Bible. I don't endorse that behavior, but I understand.
I think, even better than understand, we forgive.
We do.
You cannot forgive without understanding. So I preemptively forgive everyone for using that word. I think Christ would too. All right, we gotta get going.
It's we're past 2 hours. It's over.
We're getting into